My wife's father held our newborn underwater in the bathtub, saying, "Some babies aren't meant to survive." I watched through the bathroom doorway as Leonard gripped our 3-day-old daughter Iris by her tiny ankles, her head completely submerged in the warm bathwater. Her little arms flailed weakly under the surface. My body froze in absolute horror as his words echoed through the steamy room. This was supposed to be Iris's first bath at home. "What are you doing?" I screamed, lunging forward. Leonard's head snapped toward me, his eyes cold and calculating. He slowly lifted Iris from the water. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. Water streamed from her tiny nose and mouth as he held her suspended above the tub like she was nothing more than a wet towel. "Teaching her strength," he said calmly. "Weak babies become weak adults. Better to know now." He lowered her back toward the water. That's when something primal exploded inside me. I tackled him sideways, sending us both crashing into the bathroom wall. Iris flew from his grip, and I caught her against my chest as we hit the floor. Her lips were blue. Her tiny body was limp and cold. I pressed my mouth over her nose and mouth, breathing life back into my daughter while Leonard groaned on the tile floor behind me. "Come on, baby," I whispered against her face. "Breathe for Daddy." Her chest rose slightly. Then she coughed, spitting up water, and let out a weak cry. "You're overreacting, David," Leonard said, pulling himself upright. Blood trickled from his nose where he'd hit the wall. "I was testing her survival instincts. It's an old technique." He spoke like drowning a newborn was perfectly reasonable, like I was the crazy one for stopping him. I wrapped Iris in a towel and stood up, shaking with rage and adrenaline. "You tried to drown my daughter." My voice came out strangled and hoarse. Leonard straightened his shirt and wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand. His expression remained eerily calm. "Your wife asked me to help with the baby's first bath," he said. I was helping. Some children need to learn resilience early. The casual way he said it made my skin crawl. This wasn't some momentary lapse in judgment. He actually believed what he was doing was right. I heard footsteps in the hallway. "David, is everything okay?" Elena's voice carried that exhausted new mother worry. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her hospital gown from the delivery. Her face went white when she saw Leonard's bloody nose and me clutching Iris protectively against my chest. "Your father just tried to drown our baby," I said. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. Elena looked between us, confusion clouding her features. She'd been sleeping when Leonard offered to help with Iris's bath. I'd thought it was kind of him to volunteer. "Dad, what happened?" she asked. Leonard's expression softened when he looked at his daughter. The cold calculation disappeared, replaced by something that almost looked like love. Almost. "David misunderstood my methods," Leonard explained. "I was showing Iris how to hold her breath. It's important for child development." He made it sound so reasonable, so logical. Elena looked at me with questioning eyes, like maybe I had overreacted. "He held her underwater," I said firmly, "for at least 30 seconds. She went limp. She stopped breathing. I could hear my voice rising, but I couldn't control it. The image of Iris's blue lips was burned into my brain. Elena's face crumpled with confusion and exhaustion. She'd given birth 3 days ago after 18 hours of labor. Her body was still healing, her hormones were everywhere, and now she was trying to process what sounded like an impossible accusation against her father. "Dad would never hurt Iris," she said quietly, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Leonard smiled at his daughter with gentle reassurance, the picture of a loving grandfather wrongly accused. "Of course not, sweetheart," he said. "I love that little girl more than life itself. David is just protective. It's understandable." His tone was so calm, so reasonable. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I might have doubted myself too. That night, after Leonard left, Elena and I fought until 3 a.m. She insisted her father would never harm Iris. I insisted I knew what I saw. We went in circles, getting nowhere, while our daughter slept peacefully in her crib, oblivious to the chaos surrounding her birth. "My dad raised 3 kids, Elena said for the 10th time. "He knows what he's doing with babies." She was sitting on our bed, nursing Iris, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Maybe you imagined it worse than it was." "I didn't imagine her blue lips," I shot back. "I didn't imagine having to breathe life back into our daughter." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had it really been that long? Had I overreacted to what was maybe just an overzealous grandfather? Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I can't handle this right now, David. I just can't." She was right. She'd just given birth. Her body was exhausted. Her emotions were raw. This was supposed to be the happiest time in our lives, and instead, we were accusing her father of attempted infanticide. I agreed to let it go for now, but I made Elena promise that Leonard would never be alone with Iris again. She reluctantly agreed, though I could see she thought I was being paranoid. We fell asleep on opposite sides of the bed, a chasm of doubt and mistrust between us. The next morning, Leonard showed up with coffee and pastries from Elena's favorite bakery. He hugged his daughter carefully, mindful of her healing incision, and cooed over Iris with genuine affection. He acted like nothing had happened, like he hadn't held my child underwater less than 24 hours earlier. "How's my beautiful granddaughter this morning?" he asked, reaching for Iris. I stepped between them instinctively. Leonard's eyes met mine, and for just a split second, I saw something dark flash across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by hurt confusion. David doesn't want anyone else holding the baby right now, Elena explained quickly. New father anxiety, you know? She was trying to keep the peace, but I could hear the strain in her voice. Leonard nodded understandingly. Of course, he said. New fathers can be very protective. It's natural. But his eyes stayed on me, measuring, calculating, like he was deciding how much of a problem I was going to be. Over the next few days, Leonard visited constantly. He brought meals, helped with laundry, and doted on Elena like the perfect father. But I noticed things that made my skin crawl. The way he watched Iris sleep, his expression unreadable, how he always volunteered to help with baths or diaper changes, the questions he asked about my work schedule, when I'd be away from home. He's trying to help, Elena said when I voiced my concerns. Dad's always been hands-on with babies. He helped raise my nephew Alex when my brother was deployed. She was getting annoyed with my constant vigilance, and I understood why. To her, I was paranoid and controlling. To me, I was protecting our child from a predator. One afternoon, while Elena napped, I was in the living room with Iris when Leonard came out of the kitchen carrying a bottle. I warmed this for her, he said, reaching for the baby. You look tired, son. Let me take over for a while. I've got her, I said firmly. Leonard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There it was again, that flash of something cold and angry before the mask slipped back into place. You don't trust me, he said. It wasn't a question. We stared at each other across the living room, Iris sleeping peacefully in my arms, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. Should I asked. Leonard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us, like we'd finally acknowledged the war we were fighting. Elena loves you, he said quietly, but she loves me more. Remember that. It sounded like a threat wrapped in a gentle warning. I held Iris closer, my heart pounding against her tiny body. That evening, I called my brother Marcus in Denver. We'd been close growing up, and he'd become a detective after college. If anyone would know how to handle this situation, it was him. You need to document everything, he said, after I explained what happened. Dates, times, witnesses. If this guy is dangerous, you need evidence. He paused. But David, if you're wrong about this, you could destroy your marriage. Are you absolutely certain about what you saw? The doubt that had been gnawing at me for days suddenly felt overwhelming. What if I had misinterpreted Leonard's actions? What if I was destroying my family over a misunderstanding? But then, I remembered Iris's blue lips, her limp body in my arms, and I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I'm certain, I told Marcus. I just don't know how to prove it. He promised to do some research on Leonard's background and get back to me. Having someone believe me, even if it was just my brother, made me feel less crazy. The breaking point came a week later. Elena had gone to her postpartum appointment, leaving me home with Iris. Leonard showed up unexpectedly while she was gone. I answered the door with Iris in my arms, immediately on high alert. Elena's not here, I said. She's at the doctor. Leonard smiled pleasantly, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped past me into the house like he'd been invited. I know, he said. I came to see you. The way he said it made my blood run cold. This was the confrontation we'd been building toward. I followed him into the living room, keeping Iris tight against my chest. What do you want, Leonard? I asked. He sat down on our couch and looked at me with those calculating eyes. The mask of the loving grandfather was completely gone now. This was the real Leonard, and he was terrifying. I want you to understand something about family loyalty, he said calmly. Elena has been my daughter for 28 years. You've been her husband for 3. If you force her to choose between us, you'll lose. His voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. I'm not forcing her to choose anything, I said. I'm protecting my daughter from you. Iris stirred in my arms, making tiny sleeping sounds. Leonard's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made me want to run. That child carries my blood, he said. My legacy. I have every right to shape her development. He leaned forward slightly. What happened in the bathroom was just the beginning, David. There are so many lessons she needs to learn. The casual menace in his tone confirmed every fear I'd had. This wasn't about misunderstanding his methods. Leonard genuinely believed he had the right to subject Iris to whatever twisted training he thought necessary, and he was telling me there was nothing I could do to stop him. Stay away from my daughter, I said, backing toward the hallway. Leonard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Elena will never believe you, he said confidently. She worships me, always has, and when she finds out you're trying to turn her against her own father, she'll choose me. Then you'll have visitation every other weekend, and I'll have Iris the rest of the time. The threat was crystal clear. Leonard wasn't just planning to hurt Iris. He was planning to take her away from me entirely, and he was probably right about Elena choosing him. I'd seen how she lit up around her father, how she defended him even when my accusations seemed reasonable. We'll see about that, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Leonard stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Yes, he said quietly. We will. He walked to the door and let himself out, leaving me standing in my own living room feeling like prey that had just been marked by a predator. I called Marcus immediately after Leonard left. He threatened me, I said, pacing the living room with Iris still in my arms. He basically told me he's going to take my daughter away and continue whatever sick training he has planned for her. Did you record it? Marcus asked. I cursed myself for not thinking of that. Look, you need hard evidence. Witnesses, recordings, something concrete. Without proof, this is just your word against his. That night, Elena came home exhausted from her appointment. The doctor had cleared her for normal activities, but she was still healing emotionally from the traumatic birth. I wanted to tell her about Leonard's visit, but I knew she'd just accuse me of being paranoid again. Instead, I suggested we install a home security system. For peace of mind, I said. With a new baby, it makes sense to be extra careful. Elena agreed, probably thinking it would help with my anxiety. I had the system installed the next day, with cameras covering every room except our bedroom and bathroom. Leonard's next visit was 3 days later. He came while I was at work, spending the afternoon with Elena and Iris. When I checked the security footage from my office, my blood ran cold. The cameras showed Leonard holding Iris multiple times, but there was no audio to capture what he might be saying to her. More disturbing was the hour of footage where Leonard was alone with Iris while Elena showered. He'd taken the baby into the kitchen, out of the main camera's view. I could see him moving around, but not what he was doing. When Elena came back downstairs, Leonard was sitting in the living room with Iris like nothing had happened. I rushed home early, making an excuse about feeling sick. Elena was napping, and Leonard was gone. Iris seemed fine, but I noticed a small red mark on her wrist that hadn't been there that morning. When I asked Elena about it, she said babies get marks all the time from sleeping in weird positions. That evening, I confronted Elena about Leonard being alone with Iris. You promised me he wouldn't be left alone with her, I said. Elena's exhaustion flared into anger. I took a 10-minute shower, David. My father is not going to hurt our baby while I'm upstairs. She looked at me like I was losing my mind. You're becoming obsessed with this. It's not healthy. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. But I couldn't shake the image of that red mark on Iris's wrist, or Leonard's calculating smile when he threatened to take her away from me. I decided to take a personal day the next time he visited. I didn't have to wait long. Leonard called Elena the following morning, saying he wanted to bring lunch and spend time with his granddaughter. I told Elena I was feeling under the weather and would work from home. She seemed relieved that I'd be there to supervise, even though she'd never admit she had any concerns. Leonard arrived at noon with takeout from Elena's favorite restaurant. He seemed surprised to see me, but his mask stayed firmly in place. Feeling better today? He asked with false concern. I nodded and stayed close to Iris throughout lunch. After we ate, Elena went upstairs to pump milk for later. Leonard and I sat in the living room with Iris between us, the tension thick enough to cut. He made small talk about the weather and Elena's recovery, but his eyes kept drifting to my daughter. She's getting stronger, he observed, watching Iris wave her tiny fists in the air. Good muscle tone for her age. The way he said it made it sound like he was evaluating livestock. I picked up Iris and moved to the chair across from him. She's perfect exactly as she is, I said firmly. Leonard's smile sharpened slightly. Of course, he agreed, but perfection can always be refined. Before I could respond, Elena's voice called from upstairs. David, can you bring me that burp cloth from the kitchen? I hesitated. I didn't want to leave Leonard alone with Iris, even for 30 seconds, but Elena sounded frustrated, and I knew she was struggling with breastfeeding. I'll watch her, Leonard offered helpfully. I looked at Iris in my arms, then at Leonard's expectant face. The security cameras were rolling. If he tried anything, I'd have proof. I'll be right back, I said, reluctantly placing Iris in her bouncy seat between us. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed the cloth, and hurried back. The entire trip took maybe 45 seconds. When I returned to the living room, Leonard was sitting exactly where I'd left him, hands folded in his lap. Iris was still in her bouncy seat, looking perfectly fine. I felt foolish for being so paranoid, but I checked the baby anyway, running my hands over her arms and legs, looking for marks or signs of distress. Everything okay down there? Elena called. I brought her the burp cloth and helped her adjust the breast pump. When we came back downstairs 20 minutes later, Leonard was gone. He'd left a note saying he didn't want to overstay his welcome. That evening, I reviewed the security footage from the afternoon. My hands started shaking as I watched the timestamp. When I'd gone to the kitchen, Leonard had immediately stood up and moved toward Iris. But then, something strange happened. The video glitched, showing static for exactly 43 seconds before resuming with Leonard back in his chair. A technical malfunction at that exact moment seemed like an impossible coincidence. I called the security company, but they said glitches were rare but not unheard of, especially in newer systems. They offered to send a technician, but couldn't explain why it happened during those specific 43 seconds. I spent the rest of the night obsessing over that missing footage. What had Leonard done to Iris during those lost seconds? How had he known to disable the camera? And why hadn't Iris been crying when the video resumed if he'd hurt her? The next morning, I discovered the answer to my last question. Iris seemed lethargic and sleepy, more than usual for her age. She drank her bottle slowly and fell asleep immediately afterward. When I mentioned it to Elena, she said babies had growth spurts that made them extra sleepy. But my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I called our pediatrician and insisted on an immediate appointment. Dr. Williams examined Iris thoroughly, checking her reflexes and responses. She seemed healthy, but unusually calm for a 2-week-old. Has she been exposed to any medications? Dr. Williams asked. Sometimes babies can absorb substances through skin contact or inhalation. I told her about Leonard's unsupervised access and my suspicions. She ordered blood work immediately. Elena was furious when I told her about the doctor's visit. You're testing our baby's blood because you think my father drugged her. Her voice was shrill with disbelief. David, this has gone too far. You need professional help. The blood results came back the next day. Traces of a mild sedative were found in Iris's system. Not enough to cause serious harm, but enough to explain her unusual lethargy. Dr. Williams was legally required to report it to Child Protective Services. When I showed Elena the lab results, her world crumbled. She stared at the paper in shock, tears streaming down her face. This can't be right, she whispered. Dad would never... He loves Iris. But the evidence was undeniable. The CPS investigation began immediately. A caseworker named Janet Morris interviewed both Elena and me separately. Elena was devastated, caught between protecting her father and protecting her child. I told Janet everything, from the bathtub incident to the missing security footage. Leonard hired a lawyer before CPS even contacted him. When they questioned him about the sedative, he claimed complete ignorance. His attorney suggested that I had drugged my own daughter to frame Leonard, pointing to my documented accusations as evidence of mental instability. The investigation dragged on for 3 weeks. Leonard was prohibited from unsupervised contact with Iris, but he could still visit with Elena present. He played the role of wrongly accused grandfather perfectly, bringing Elena flowers and expressing concern for her mental health during this difficult time. Meanwhile, my marriage was falling apart. Elena blamed me for destroying her relationship with her father. She barely spoke to me, spending most of her time at her mother's house with Iris. I was losing my family while trying to protect them. Marcus finally called with information about Leonard's background. What he'd found made my blood run cold. Leonard's first wife had died in a suspicious drowning accident when Elena was 5. His second wife had divorced him after accusing him of abusing their son, though no charges were ever filed. Most disturbing, Leonard's nephew Alex, the one he'd supposedly helped raise, had been hospitalized twice as an infant for unexplained injuries. This guy has a pattern, Marcus said, but he's smart about it. Stays just under the radar, never leaves enough evidence for charges. He paused. David, if the CPS investigation doesn't stick, you need to get Elena and Iris away from him. This man is dangerous. I tried to share Marcus's findings with Elena, but she refused to listen. You're destroying our family, she said through tears. First you accused Dad of trying to kill Iris. Now you're digging up ancient history to make him look bad. She was spiraling, caught between love for her father and fear for her child. The CPS case fell apart 2 weeks later. Leonard's lawyer had planted enough doubt about the timeline and my mental state that the caseworker couldn't prove he'd administered the sedative. Without concrete evidence, they closed the investigation with a finding of unsubstantiated. Elena was relieved, but I was terrified. Leonard had beaten the system, just like he had before, and now he knew I was actively working against him. The gloves were about to come off. I was right. 3 days after CPS closed the case, Elena served me with divorce papers. Leonard's fingerprints were all over it, from the expensive lawyer to the custody arrangement that gave Elena primary physical custody. I would get Iris every other weekend, exactly as Leonard had predicted. I can't live like this anymore, Elena said as I read the papers. You're paranoid and controlling. You've turned our home into a war zone. She was saying Leonard's words in her own voice, but she genuinely believed them. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Leonard's lawyer painted me as an unstable new father who'd become fixated on his wife's family. They used my own protective behavior against me, twisting my attempts to keep Iris safe into evidence of mental illness. My lawyer was competent, but outgunned. Leonard had resources I couldn't match, and Elena's testimony was devastating. She painted a picture of a loving father who'd done nothing but try to help with his granddaughter, only to be met with increasingly paranoid accusations from her unstable husband. The judge awarded Elena primary custody, with supervised visitation from me until I completed psychological evaluation and anger management counseling. Leonard had won completely. He would have almost unlimited access to Iris while I was relegated to weekend visitor status. That night, I sat in my empty house planning my next move. Legal channels had failed. The system had failed. Iris was going to grow up under Leonard's influence, subjected to whatever twisted training he thought necessary, unless I did something desperate. I started following Leonard, learning his routines and habits. He lived alone in a large house across town, the same house where his first wife had supposedly drowned. He maintained a predictable schedule, going to the gym every morning at 6 a.m., grocery shopping on Sundays, visiting Elena and Iris 3 times a week. My plan was simple, but dangerous. I needed irrefutable evidence of Leonard's true nature, something so damning that even his expensive lawyer couldn't explain it away. But getting that evidence meant putting Iris at risk, the one thing I'd sworn never to do. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. Elena called to say she had a job interview and needed someone to watch Iris for a few hours. Leonard had volunteered, of course. This was my chance to document whatever he did when he thought no one was watching. I installed hidden cameras throughout Leonard's house the night before, using my key to Elena's car to get Leonard's spare house key from her keychain. The cameras were tiny, virtually invisible, and motion-activated. If Leonard tried to hurt Iris, I'd have proof. The next morning, I watched from my car as Elena dropped Iris off at Leonard's house. My heart pounded as I saw my daughter disappear inside with the man I was certain wanted to harm her. Every instinct screamed at me to rush in and grab her, but I forced myself to wait. For the first hour, the cameras showed normal grandparent activities. Leonard fed Iris, changed her diaper, and played with her in the living room. I started to wonder if I really was paranoid, if I'd imagined the threats and dangers. Then Leonard carried Iris upstairs to what looked like a nursery he'd set up specifically for her visits. My blood turned to ice as I watched him place her in a crib that had been modified with restraints, soft fabric straps that looked innocent but held her tiny arms and legs immobile. "Time for your next lesson, little one," Leonard said to the camera, though he didn't know it was there. He pulled out a small medical bag and removed what looked like a syringe. "Grandfather is going to teach you about pain tolerance." I was already running toward my car before he finished speaking. The 20-minute drive to Leonard's house took me 8 minutes through red lights and stop signs. I called 911 on the way, screaming into the phone about a man torturing a baby, giving them Leonard's address. I kicked in Leonard's front door without hesitation. He was still upstairs with Iris, and I could hear her crying, a sound that tore through my chest like a knife. I bounded up the stairs 3 at a time, following the sound to the modified nursery. Leonard was standing over Iris with the syringe in his hand, her tiny leg already red from whatever injection he'd given her. She was screaming in pain, her face purple with distress, but the restraints kept her from moving. I tackled Leonard from behind, sending us both crashing into the wall. The syringe flew from his hand and shattered against the floor. I punched him in the face, feeling his nose crunch under my knuckles, then again in the ribs. All the rage and fear I'd carried for months exploded out of me. "David, stop!" Leonard wheezed from the floor. Blood streamed from his nose and mouth. "You're making a mistake." Even then, even caught red-handed torturing my daughter, he tried to manipulate the situation. I ignored him and rushed to Iris, carefully removing the restraints and lifting her from the crib. She was burning with fever, her tiny body convulsing from whatever Leonard had injected. I pressed my face against hers and whispered promises that she was safe, that Daddy would never let anyone hurt her again. Police sirens wailed outside as Leonard struggled to his feet. "Those restraints are for her safety," he said desperately. "She has seizures." I was giving her anti-seizure medication. His lies came so smoothly, so believably, that I almost doubted what I'd seen. The police burst into the room with weapons drawn. They found Leonard bloodied on the floor, me holding a screaming baby, and medical equipment scattered around what looked like a torture chamber disguised as a nursery. To their eyes, it wasn't immediately clear who the villain was. "That man was torturing my daughter," I said, nodding toward Leonard. "I have video evidence." The cameras I'd hidden were still recording, capturing Leonard's lessons and his attempts to cover up afterward. The paramedics took Iris immediately, rushing her to the hospital while police separated Leonard and me for questioning. I gave them everything, the cameras, my documentation of Leonard's behavior, Marcus's background research. The evidence was finally overwhelming. Leonard's house contained a horrifying collection of training materials, modified cribs with restraints, injection equipment, detailed journals documenting his plans for Iris's development. He'd been planning to subject her to systematic abuse designed to create what he called superior resilience. Elena arrived at the hospital in hysterics. The doctors explained that Iris had been injected with a paralytic agent, not enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to cause excruciating pain while preventing her from moving. It was torture, pure and simple. "I didn't know," Elena sobbed as we sat in the pediatric ICU. "I never imagined. He seemed so loving with her." Her world had shattered completely, her image of her father destroyed by undeniable evidence of his cruelty. Leonard was arrested and charged with child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. His lawyer tried every angle, claiming the equipment was for legitimate medical purposes, that I'd planted evidence, that Leonard was trying to help a sick child. But the video evidence was damning. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Elena testified against her father, tears streaming down her face as she described the man she'd thought she knew. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Leonard received 15 years in prison. As they led him away in shackles, he looked directly at me with those cold, calculating eyes. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. Even in defeat, he remained a predator. Elena and I slowly rebuilt our marriage through months of counseling. She struggled with guilt over not believing me, while I worked through the trauma of nearly losing my daughter. But we had Iris, alive and healthy, and that was enough to build on. 6 months after Leonard's conviction, Elena found a letter hidden in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house. It was addressed to her, written in Leonard's handwriting, dated 3 days before Iris was born. She brought it to me with shaking hands. The letter detailed Leonard's complete plan, how he intended to eliminate my influence over Iris through staged incidents and false accusations. how he would systematically condition her to accept pain and fear as normal parts of life, how she would become his perfect granddaughter, shaped entirely by his twisted philosophy. Reading Leonard's own words describing his plans for our daughter made my stomach turn, but it also confirmed what I'd known from the beginning. My instincts had been right. My daughter had been in mortal danger from the moment she was born. We moved to Denver to be closer to Marcus and start fresh where Leonard's shadow couldn't reach us. Iris grew into a happy, healthy toddler who loved books and building blocks and had no memory of her grandfather's attempts to destroy her. Elena found a job she loved, and I started sleeping through the night without checking the locks 3 times. 2 years later, Leonard died in prison. Another inmate, a father himself, had learned what Leonard was there for. Elena cried when we got the news, not for her father, but for the man she'd thought he was. That man had never existed, but grieving the illusion was necessary for healing. Now Iris is 5 years old, starting kindergarten next week. She runs through our backyard chasing butterflies, laughs at silly jokes, and has never known a moment of fear or pain at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. Sometimes I watch her play and think about the alternate timeline where I'd doubted myself, where I'd let Leonard continue his lessons. In that timeline, my daughter's light would have been extinguished before it ever had a chance to shine. But in this one, the one where a father's instincts proved stronger than a monster's manipulation, she gets to be exactly what she was always meant to be, perfectly, beautifully, safely herself.